look at 236, that's a picture of the magazines and the ammunition that was removed from that cupboard, correct?
Yeah, so at this point, everything was taken out and photographed on top of that TV stand there. It's the two magazines, the bullets inside of the bag, even the box that the ammunition was in.
And I just wanted to confirm that those were the same magazines that were inside the cabinet.
Yeah, correct.
So those were empty.
They were empty.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Detective.
Thanks.
When you were discussing Exhibit 256 with the prosecution, the prosecutor specifically asked you if there were no other locking mechanisms found in the home. Do you remember that question?
I do.
You arrived at the home after, if you recall, after 2 p.m. on November 30th of 2021.
Yeah, it was short. It was around the time of the first video we saw. I don't know the exact time, but around the first time of the video we saw.
So it's fair to say you have no knowledge of what was in that house prior to your arrival at approximately 2:50 on November 30th of 2021.
Yeah, I can only speak to what I saw when I went inside the residence. I don't know what was there prior.
You can't say whether or not there were any additional locking mechanisms in the house that morning. Is that fair? You have no knowledge of that.
Again, yeah, I can only speak to what I saw, what I found. I don't know.
Exhibit 260, you went through some photos of video games. 257 was some video game, the gaming system. 258 were video games. 259 was more video games. 260, if you recall, and I can hand you the exhibit if you'd like, was Call of Duty and a game that you weren't familiar with, Attack on Titan.
Correct.
Did you need to look at that exhibit?
No.
Okay. Call of Duty, you saw, based on your testimony, it sounded like you were a little familiar with Call of Duty.
Yeah, I don't play video games, but obviously I'm familiar just with seeing commercials, and I'm aware of what Call of Duty is.
Okay. And on the front, on the cover, it has WW2 for World War II. Is that correct?
Correct.
Call of Duty, you would agree, is a type of military video game.
Correct.
It's what would be described as a first-person shooter video game.
Correct.
And if you know, and if you don't, please tell me you don't know. A person playing Call of Duty is a person holding a firearm in the video game and engaging in combat. If you know.
Honestly, I'm probably the last person to test about video games. I don't play video games.
But to your knowledge, it is a military video game, which is a first-person shooter military video game.
Correct.
At the end of your direct testimony, you discussed that the prosecutor asked you if James Crumbley's phone was seized, correct?
Correct.
Now, there are a couple of different ways that law enforcement can obtain somebody's cell phone. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
You can get a search warrant and take it from them, right?
Correct.
They can hand it to you, right?
Correct.
You can say something like, you can give it to me or we'll get a search warrant, and they can hand it to you, right?
Correct.
In this case, if you recall, at some point, Mr. Crumbley did not have his cell phone because he said, I need to get my cell phone back, correct? While in the back of a patrol car.
Correct.
At some point, he got his cell phone back.
I didn't have any exchange with him after that about the cell phones. Honestly, I don't know if he got it back.
Now, do you recall that, if you're not aware, just let me know. Are you aware that there was some conversation about James and his wife giving their phones to law enforcement and them having to obtain some sort of another phone to be able to communicate with their family?
Yeah, so at some point, Lieutenant Marsban showed up at 112 East Street, and he had a conversation with James and Jennifer about the cell phones. I don't know the specific language of the search warrant, but the phones were given to Marsban, who then he provided to me and my partner, and we took them back to the high school.
And if you recall, there was also some discussion about how James and Jennifer could obtain kind of a temporary phone so that they would be able to communicate with people while law enforcement had their phones, if you recall.
Yeah, that was a conversation I had with Lieutenant Marsban. I don't remember the specifics of the conversation, but I know they did have a conversation about the phones.
Okay, so you just know that there was a conversation that occurred where it was discussed with James and Jennifer how to obtain like a temporary phone, like a track phone or something like that.
I don't know the specifics of the conversation. I just know that they did have a conversation about it.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Ron.
Just quickly, thank you. Detective, did James ever once tell you that the 6-hour 9mm used to commit the Oxford High School shooting was ever locked up?
He did not.
Okay. Nothing further.
You may step down. Who's the next one?
Can I check in the hallway very briefly, Judge?
Yeah, can you assume the link to get it right there? Is it long,
It's shorter witness, but I think we're signaling you need a break.
one break? Okay, 10 minutes. Okay.
All right, for the jury.
All right, you may be seated. Please remain seated while we take.
All right, guys, I'm sorry for the disruption. I had a power outage here. This is the second time I've had a power outage since I've lived here. Obviously, it wasn't very long, but I might need to get some sort of uninterruptible power supply. And then I need to presumably get one for the modem so that it would also remain active. So apologies for the disruption. So we have 10 minutes of break. So what can we talk about? Yeah, while we're sort of waiting. Lots of power blinks here. So yeah, now I need to find a uninterruptible power supply. So I'll go on Amazon and charge that to the business account. Did I ever get my Instacart? No. Theoretically, I'm supposed to get Walmart today. We'll see. Also, I want to take an opportunity to apologize to my moderators in what I was saying yesterday. Sometimes when I'm thinking off the cuff, I just sort of say what I'm thinking without really contemplating whether or not it's necessarily a good idea to say it publicly, and I appreciate their frustration. I would be frustrated too. Yeah. Sometimes moderating for me is difficult because I'm a difficult person sometimes for my own flaws, which is not to excuse or justify those flaws. It's just the nature of me. Self-awareness is not an attempt to excuse it. It's just an attempt to be self-aware and recognize your flaw, that you have an error. Part of which is fueled by depression, although that can't be a perfect explanation for it. I think in some ways the depression has produced a learned behavior that has now gotten a life of its own outside of the depression, but still that is my own responsibility. So we're waiting. sometimes I get mad at the moderators sometimes for any number of reasons. And I sometimes express those feelings the same way I would express them if it were a member of chat that was making me frustrated. So I think their frustration comes from the fact that they're volunteering for me. And I don't know if call them out is exactly the right phraseology, but I address them with my concerns or displeasure in an equal way. And that can feel unwelcome, especially if you're taking the time to volunteer, that I express my displeasure in such a public way. And so, you know, it isn't necessarily, it's just sometimes I talk about things without really, I just share what I'm thinking. It's that whole like not being rude thing, but it's like being direct or something. But when you're discussing things with your moderators publicly, you're arguably discussing an internal thing publicly, and that perhaps is the mistake. But in any event, they are of course not. Let me say this. I think it's possible to be wrong in your feelings. I don't feel that this is one of those occasions. I feel like their feelings are justified based on the circumstances. So I feel like their feelings are reasonable. And if they're angry or disappointed or whatever, then I think that's a reasonable reaction. And if they don't want to moderate for me anymore as a result, I think that's also a reasonable reaction, because certainly from their point of view, and perhaps in an absolute sense, I'm being a jerk. So I'm working on it. I'm working on it. Yeah, depression is part of the problem, but it isn't the entire problem. I think that depression has produced a set of learned responses that are now independent of the depression. So even though the depression has gotten a lot better, the learned behavior from when I was wounded, I still act like a wounded animal, if we like the analogy, right? Even though I'm no longer wounded, I still act in the responses I learned when I was wounded. In this case, the wounding was from the depression, but the analogy still works. So the behavior is now a self-existent thing, even though the stimulus is no longer as great. And so one of the ways depression manifested itself in particular for me, depression manifested itself in three ways that I saw in particular. Depression manifested itself for me in lethargy, which is just being kind of tired to do things. So I would spend disturbing amount of times doing literally nothing, basically staring at the wall. Can you stare at the wall for long periods of times? It turns out you can when you have depression, yes. The wall turns out to be way more interesting than you would have expected. Apathy, just generally not caring about things. And also my depression manifested in being emotionally, what would you say, oversensitive or hypersensitive. Because I was depressed, I was emotionally, I don't know if vulnerable is exactly the right word. I think hypersensitive is correct. It's like hyper, like an allergic reaction, right? I would take any perceived criticism or any perceived fault and respond to it with a level of response that was unwarranted for the insult or the slight. Because I perceived it, I don't know if perceived it is exactly right, but my emotional fortitude was so low that I responded to it with a vitriol or at least manifested in a more aggressive way than might be strictly warranted. That, of course, is in no small part also due to the troll community out there, which at times has deliberately tried to provoke me for specifically this thing. So there's some really bad actors out there in the world who, for whatever reason, a combination of reasons, some of whom I think generally like the reaction. They just generally like that their reaction. But there's actually some real evil people out there. I genuinely believe. So some people are just, it's funny. But I think there's actually really malicious people out there in the troll world who just want to see people destroyed for no other reason than it seems to. I don't even know what their motivation is, but they seem to really want to destroy people. And to some extent, they have partially succeeded because they found someone who was wounded and willing to kick someone when they're down. And so that didn't help either. So I say all this, again, not to justify, but to try to explain, at least from my own perspective, what I think is going on. I don't say this to excuse what I'm doing. I don't say it to do anything other than try to explain, why are you the way you are, Kurt? Okay, here's why I think I'm the way I am. Here are the things that I think have led to this. And it's merely an attempt to describe rather than justify, if that makes sense. So, yeah. I genuinely believe in my heart of hearts. I genuinely believe in my heart of hearts that there were some trolls on this channel who were actively attempting to get me to self-delete. For whatever malicious sense of pleasure it has. There's just something in themselves that, I don't know, is so broken that I believe they were genuinely trying to drive me to it. And I don't really fully understand that. I don't fully understand that level of maliciousness, but I genuinely believe that some, but not all trolls, but there are some who are, for whatever reason, like that. And they find a vulnerable, wounded animal, and like a lion going after a wounded gazelle or something, they are called to it to off him. I don't know what that's all about. Was this recently? In some ways, yes. There is one troll in particular that we have to keep banning over and over again. Fortunately, we've done a pretty good job, but there was rumors. I don't know if it's true or not, but there was a rumor at one point that there was a Discord that was formed specifically for the purpose of bringing me down. I don't know if that's true or not. I've never seen proof of it or not, but there was a rumor that there was a Discord that existed of people solely to try to get me canceled, deleted, and otherwise harangue me. And when you have a bunch of people who are committed, apparently, to this goal, well, they might have an influence on someone's psyche, because that was their objective, I guess. I don't understand it, but that appears to be what happened. Why? I don't know why. See, I don't know that there's a good answer to that question. I don't really think there is a good answer to that question. I don't think, you would ideally want an answer that shows that I've harmed them in some way that would reciprocate that, right? You want, I totally understand why. You want me to say, oh, they're doing it because I did this to them. And you're like, oh, okay, that's understandable, at least on some level, right? You want to understand it, that there's some sort of reciprocity to this, but there isn't. There isn't. Whatever slight I may have given these people in the past is completely, in my view, disproportionate to whatever I did. But then again, as I sort of commented myself, I've acted in a disproportionate way to some of the stimulus coming to my direction. So that may be on my part a learned behavior. Maybe it's a learned behavior on their part. Maybe they're also dealing with depression and mental issues. Maybe whatever. Although, again, I honest to God think it's evil. I think depression and learned behavior and stuff can only go so far. When you're actively trying to, like, my mistakes were not because I was actively trying to cause harm. You know, I made mistakes perhaps without thinking about it, maybe in an unconscious way, but I wasn't actively trying to cause harm. But the people I'm talking about have come back over and over, and you keep banning their accounts over and over and over again, right? So you can no longer go with the explanation of they were acting in an unconscious way, because they're well aware of it, right? So they are persisting despite their awareness, and essentially for the same reason that stalkers stalk. You know, who can say where that comes from? But there comes a point where you're like, whatever sort of rational explanations you can put for stalking, you know, whatever reasons you could justify stalking by, there comes a point where like justifications don't make sense anymore. Or if not justifications, maybe justification is the wrong word, rationale. Like the rationale, at least the internal justification for it. Like there's some situations where like you could at least understand it on some level, and then you just get past that. I don't know what that's all about. And yeah. So again, I just say all this to try to describe what I think is going on, because I think being self-aware is a good start. And being like, okay, I made a mistake. Why did I make that mistake? You know, because I was discussing something regarding my mods in a public way. I was like, okay, so why did I do that? What do I think is behind that for me? What do I think caused that? And it's like, well, I think I did it just because it was the topic of discussion. Someone had said something, and, you know, I just sort of was expounding on my thoughts without really thinking about it. In so much as I was thinking about it in so much as I was aware of the words, but I wasn't thinking about their impact. You know, I was just expressing my thoughts, but, you know, someone living their truth. We know that there are assholes out there who try to get by just saying, well, I'm living my truth. And I'm like, you know, well, sometimes you're an asshole. And at least in that moment, I was an asshole. You know, I might have been trying to express something true. But I didn't really think about the impact on others. I didn't really think about the fact that I was discussing something internally in a public way. I didn't really consider the fact that the people I was talking about might consider the fact that I was shaming them, which wasn't really what I was trying to do. I was just, from my point of view, trying to describe it like an engineering problem. But of course, from their perception, again, which is completely reasonable, right? This is like how perspectives work and how human beings work, right? My perspective is my perspective. Their perspective is their perspective, and it doesn't necessarily mean their perspective is unreasonable. It could be unreasonable, but in this situation, it's not, right? So from their perspective, they interpreted it reasonably as me trying to shame them, as me trying to call them out, as me trying to whatever, even though that wasn't my intent behind the thing, but that's how it was received. And that, of course, just goes to show like how communications can be difficult, because how one person intends to communicate isn't necessarily how it's received. And also sometimes you don't get the feedback back. You don't realize how you're being perceived, which also, like, as much self-awareness as I have, I still don't have like perfect self-awareness. It's really, really hard without feedback sometimes to see the obvious about yourself, because you're just kind of running in an automatic way. And like, so if I did that behavior and no one called me out on it and no one mentioned it to me, I wouldn't even realize I was doing it, right? I'd be like, where'd everyone go? Why is everyone gone? It wouldn't occur to me, you know, that there was a reason, because, you know, having that kind of self-reflection is really fucking difficult. So we do what we can within our limitations. You know? So only when I was effectively called out, in private incidentally, which, you know, to their credit, only when I was called out did I realize there was a problem. I would have never realized there was a problem had not someone not said something to me. And incidentally, by the way, it's not the first time that one of my moderators has expressed these concerns. So again, they might very well be frustrated because it's the second, third, fourth, fifth time they've had to have this discussion with me, because it's really, really hard to change your behavior overnight, and they don't like the behavior very much, and so they don't want to be my moderator anymore, which again is completely reasonable. It's like, how many chances do you need to give somebody? Really, right? So what can you do? It makes me sad. You know, I feel sad in some ways, because it's like, well, basically, for lack of a better description, I realize I sinned. Because remember, sinning is also an archery term. To sin is an archery term. It means to miss the mark, which probably is where they got the term from in archery, because that's kind of what a sin is. Like, I sinned because I missed the mark. It may not be because I was deliberate, but I missed the mark, and so I have sinned. So I apologize for my sins with a full awareness that I will almost certainly sin again in this exact same way, probably many times, because I am flawed. Yeah. I can only hope in some ways that now that the depression is alleviated, particularly since I've been on this new medication, Vyvanse, which has done wonders for me in sort of alleviating my depression. I've been on Vyvanse now for what, 4 months, although that's been a little bit spotty due to supply problems, but I digress. So sometimes I've been off Vyvanse because, well, I literally can't find supply, because apparently all ADHD medications are impossible to find, and I, like everyone else, has to go find the medications. Although in my particular case, I'm not taking it for ADHD. It just happens to be an ADHD medication. In my particular case, I'm taking it for depression rather than ADHD. But that be that as it may, it works great for depression. At least my depression, so it's fantastic. But finding a supply of it's been really fucking hard. But anyways, I've only been on it for 4 months, but the behavior persists. Because the behavior was learned through, at least in part, the very long trench of depression. So removing the external stimuli, you know, means I'm no longer decreasing, but it doesn't suddenly make my behavior change. You know, it's like the vulnerability or the feeling of the wound, you know, the feeling of the wound persists. So now I have to change my psychology, which is tricky at best. That's hard. And in the meantime, I'm going to absolutely screw up. I say all these things partly to help myself understand the problem, and partly in the hope that maybe some of it resonates with some of you and might be of value to you in some way. So, yeah.
Yes, Judge. Next witness is David Henry.
Easily confused.
You know, if I just loved myself, that would probably go a long way. Jordan Peterson has he has many great ideas, at least in his books. You know, my love affair with Jordan Peterson is definitely diminished somewhat especially since he had his brush with death and stuff. His personality is a lot more acerbic than it used to be. But he has in his one of his 12 rules as the original book is treat yourself. What is he? How does he say it? Treat yourself as though you were caring for somebody else, which is really, really true. Like when my mom was visiting me, because she likes helping me move, she likes being part of that. I mean, she still thinks of me of her little son, which, you know, fair enough. And so she wanted to come and be part of my move journey. So she came and helped me pack and helped me unpack and get everything set up just so and so forth and so on. Right. And, yeah. Yellow Pill says not all ADHD meds, it's the ones that are controlled substances. As a nurse practitioner with ADHD, it's frustrating on both sides when there's a shortage because narcotics are so tightly regulated. Yeah, it doesn't help. But yeah, but it's funny because when my mom was here, it's funny because when my mom was here, you know, and I would go out of my way, as you would expect, to be like, is there anything I can do for you? Is there anything I can do to make you more comfortable? Anything I can get for you? Like, you know, just go completely out of my way to be like, is there anything, you know, just basically like constantly offering anything. And she's like, why don't you treat yourself this way? I was like, I don't know. Why is it so hard sometimes to treat yourself like you actually care about yourself? Why can't I treat myself? Why can't I treat myself as well as I treat my mother? How hard is that? Apparently it's very hard.
When was that?
Okay.
So you didn't stay retired too long?
No.
In your 34 years working with the sheriff's office, could you tell us, please, what sort of assignments you had?
My last assignment prior to retiring was the sergeant of the Fugitive apprehension team. Prior to that, I worked about 10 and a half years in our special investigations unit. Prior to that, I worked in our auto theft unit.
I remember Jordan Peters. We'll also talk about this while I'm on the subject because, you know, he's just introducing himself, so it's fine. I also remember when Jordan Peterson was describing that's how suicide is so harmful to others, right? It's really devastating to others because in a lot of cases, people are left wondering, you know, is there anything I could have done? Is there anything I could have done different? You know, it can be really, truly devastating to some people. And Jordan Peterson was describing, I think it's someone he knew personally, at one point in his life, this elderly woman, and I think it was her grandchild. This woman's grandchild had self-deleted. And she was for years beating herself up all the time. You know, just like, what could I have done? What could I have differently? Why wasn't I a good enough grandmother, right? All that stuff, like just in a constant cycle of endless self-criticism, endless pain, endless whatever. And Jordan Peterson said he was counseling this woman and he said to her, hey, her husband, right? Because she's still married. It's like, hey, do you sit your husband down like every day and you tell him, well, you know, what a bastard he is, what a rat bastard he is, and what failure he is as a grandfather? Do you sit him down and tell him what an absolute failure and bastard he is because he completely and utterly failed in every possible way by his granddaughter who's now dead? Do you do that? And she's like, no, I could never do that. And so he says, well, why do you do it to yourself? That's a fucking good question, Jordan. I got nothing.
We were.
And tell us how that happened.
I believe it was December 2nd. Lieutenant Willis asked me to attempt to locate both.
And if I told you they were formally charged on Friday, December 3rd, does that sound right?
Yes.
Okay, so Detective Willis sitting at the table here asked you to locate them?
Yes.
What information did you have at your disposal when you were given this assignment?
They're basic information. They're pictures, full names, height, weight, addresses, vehicles they drove, things of that nature.
Were you made aware that there were phones were seized on the evening of November the 30th?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us, please, what did you and your team do to attempt to locate the defendant?
We began looking at and conducting surveillance at their residence. Any family members that we knew of, friends, things of that nature. Checked
area hotels, places that we might think they might be.
Did you locate them? You were given this assignment on December the 2nd, you said?
Yes,
Did you locate them that day?
we did not.
Were you able to identify where they had stayed from November the 30th until that point?
We had identified a hotel that had stayed. I don't specifically remember the name of the hotel.
Okay.
Any hotel.
That's fine. When you received that information, what did you do?
We checked with the hotel staff to find out whether there's still guests there, whether they checked out. And in fact, they had checked out.
So after you learned that they had checked out from that hotel, what happened next?
We continued to check area hotels, surveillance of any known locations, and eventually we located a vehicle that belonged to them at a hotel in Auburn.
And when you identified this vehicle belonging to either James or Jennifer Crumbley, what happened next?
I pulled all of the team to that location and we began constant surveillance on that vehicle to check and see if they would come back for it.
Was that on Thursday, December the 2nd or Friday, December the 3rd?
That was on Friday, December the 3rd.
And did either the defendant or his wife come back to the vehicle?
They did not.
And tell us, please, what's happening at that point in time?
At that point, we're still trying to locate them. We're still, again, checking anything, social media, anything we can find to try to locate them.
And were you able to at that point?
No, we didn't.
All right. Tell us what happened next.
At some point late in the evening, and I don't remember the exact time, we were made aware that their other vehicle had been located in a parking lot by the Detroit Police Department.
Okay, so this is late in the evening on Friday, December the 3rd?
Correct.
Okay. Did you come to learn that they were formally charged at noon on December the 3rd?
Yes,
Okay, so earlier that same day?
correct.
All right. When you learned that they were charged, what did you do personally?
Myself and one of the other detectives went to what we learned was their attorney's office and checked the office parking lot or surrounding parking lots to see if their vehicle might be there. By chance, they would be in the office with the attorney. Upon not finding the vehicle, we went in and made contact with one of their attorneys.
Okay. And without telling us what was said in that conversation, did you find either James or Jennifer Crumbley there?
Did not.
Okay. And at that
Thank you
point in
for
time, they
becoming
had
an
the same
uncivilian
custody,
yellow
correct?
pill. Appreciate your
My
99
understanding.
cents a month.
And so would that have been before noon on December the 3rd or after noon December the 3rd?
It was afternoon.
Okay, so after they were charged.
Yes,
All right. And backing us up a little bit in the timeline, it was after that the vehicle belonging to one of the defendants was recovered?
yes, several hours.
Several hours later. Okay, thank you.
Oh, no, I kind of like
Later
the
that
wall.
evening, Friday, December 3rd, what did you learn?
I mean, I appreciate that there's something with it
The
other than
vehicle
having just a
was
plain
located in the parking
background.
lot in the
It's
business in
classy.
Detroit.
It works for me,
So another vehicle belonging to.
I'm not sure there's a lot of great
James or Jennifer Crumbley
alternatives.
was located in Detroit.
to be honest.
Tell us what
It's
happened.
workable.
At
Thank
that
you,
point, I
GSD
left one person
Dog
sitting
Mom
on the
for
vehicle
10
and
gift
all of
memberships.
this. Just by chance they came back to it. And the rest of the team and myself went to Detroit to attempt to locate them somewhere in the area of the vehicle.
The law enforcement personnel involved in this endeavor, was it contained to just the 7 of you?
No, sir.
Okay. Tell us what you encountered when you went to the location where the vehicle was found.
Why does Crumbley have on
Originally,
headphones?
When we got there,
Yeah.
there were several Detroit police officers that had the street blocked.
It's his belief in
And the
circles. He likes to just be
secured
surrounded by
above.
circles all the time.
As we searched the area, because we had no idea.
It's a stonemason
whether they had
thing.
Walked away from the car, they were in the building, we didn't know.
He's a
We
really
were searching the
advanced
area.
stonemason,
More and more law
so he knows how to
enforcement
make
officers
circles.
arrived. Officers from the U.S. Marshals arrived to
Yeah.
assist us, the Border Patrol, Michigan State Police, more Detroit Police, all arrived on scene.
Okay. After the exterior of the location was searched, and I take it no one was found then?
Correct.
Okay. What happened next?
We formulated a plan to begin searching the building. It was a 3-story industrial building. We had several officers on site, so at that point, we decided to begin going room to room and search the entire building.
Okay. I'm going to show you what's been admitted as People's Exhibit 307. This is a photograph here. Do you recognize what's in this photograph?
I do.
And tell how.
That is the industrial building where the vehicle was located in the parking lot.
Okay. So the parking lot would be behind this chain link fence to the right of the photograph?
Correct.
Okay. And did you and your team participate in the physical search of the interior of this building?
We did.
Okay. And now, contained to the interior of the building, again, was it just the 7 of you or other law enforcement personnel involved as well?
Oh, several law enforcement officers.
All right, tell us about that, please.
The plan was formulated that the Detroit Police Department would search the first floor of the building. The rest of the teams that were there, we took on the task of searching the second and third floor of the building.
Okay. Now, was this done in secret or is this out in the public as far as the knowledge?
Oh, no, it was very obvious, very apparent. There was dozens and dozens of officers. We went room to room. At some point, we had obtained keys to some of the rooms. When we had those keys, we were able to unlock the door, announce our presence, go in and search every place in the room that could potentially hide a human being. Other rooms, we did not have keys for, and we were forced to force our way into those rooms.
When you say force our way into the rooms, can you describe what that looks like?
Yeah, there are several tools that are used to what's called breach or force a door open. There's a long Halligan type pole that the firemen would use. You jam it into the door frame and pry the door back and get the lock to sometimes pop. If that doesn't work, we have a 35-pound battering ram, and we will batter the door lock mechanism until the door opens.
Okay. Is that a quiet endeavor or is that loud?
Oh, it's very noisy. Very noisy.
So specific to the 3 floors in what's the building depicted here in 307, which areas did you and your team search?
The second and third floor.
And was anybody located in those searches?
Not on the second or third floor.
At some point, were you made aware that James and his wife were found on the first floor?
Yes.
Were you involved in the actual breaching of that room and the arrest?
No, that was handled by the Detroit SWAT team, I believe, handled that.
Okay, and they had already been assigned to the first floor?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And tell us what happened after that occurred.
As soon as the SWAT team entered that room and searched it and discovered the Crumbleys in that room, they were taken into custody by Detroit, and then they were turned over to my team, who took custody of them and transported them back up here to Lincoln County.
Okay, do you recall the approximate time that occurred?
Probably 1:30, 1:15, somewhere. It was after 1 o'clock in the morning.
In the morning, so we're talking Saturday, December the 4th.
Yes, sir.
And is James Crumbley in court today?
He is.
Can you please point and describe something he's wearing today?
Gray suit and headphones.
Your Honor, would record reflect the identification of the defendant?
The record will so reflect.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Ross?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Your involvement began on December 2nd of 2021, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
You were out of town on November 30th. Is it safe to say you were aware of the shooting that occurred at Oxford High School on November 30th prior to your involvement?
Yes.
Now, your involvement was as the sergeant of the Fugitive apprehension team.
Correct.
It's also called FAP, is that correct?
Correct.
You testified that unit is responsible for locating people with felony warrants or wanted for serious crimes.
Correct.
Your unit did not get involved in all felony warrant arrests, is that fair?
I'm not sure I understand.
Sure. All felony warrant arrests in Oakland County, your unit did not go and arrest everybody who has a felony warrant. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. And your unit did not get involved with all crimes that people were arrested for. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay, and now we have some information about the Dow Jones for no particular reason. So apparently the Dow Jones is up
And let me clarify.
0.75%. Oh, okay, that's the end of Dow Jones
We heard
information.
some testimony previously that there was a warrant issued by the court, correct?
Correct.
In this case, correct? And based on your experience, you were a law enforcement officer for 34 years, you were a detective for a number of years. You know that somebody who's accused of a crime and charged
Yeah, that was very much stream. I don't know
can
what's
walk
going on.
himself into a court, correct?
Correct.
With or without an attorney, right?
Right.
And that includes for felonies.
Correct.
Their attorney, you're aware that there have been times where their attorney has arranged, sometimes with the detective, sometimes with the prosecutor's office, in various ways. Their attorney can arrange for them to be turned in to the court or the police department on a specific day and time. Is that fair?
Sure.
The other ways are involving your former unit,
Correct.
and that's done by law enforcement. The attorneys don't call you up and say, hey, can you come get my client? That's the police who say, go get this person.
Correct.
And then obviously other agencies can then get involved with our other arrests as well. Is that fair?
Yes.
In this
Inflation
situation,
report was released today. I'll
your
give you the
involvement
inflation
was
report.
requested
My
prior
groceries
to
were way
Mr.
too
Crumbley being
expensive.
charged.
Yes.
There's your
You
inflation
testified that your
report.
involvement was December 2nd of 2021.
Yes.
You were contacted, and I don't know if this was clear, you were contacted by Lieutenant Willis.
Yes.
He contacted you on December 2nd of 2021 and asked you to locate James and Jennifer Crumbley.
Yes.
Now, did you learn as part of your involvement or as part of getting that initial information that there were some concerns? Well, let me go back. You're aware that after the Oxford High School
Inflation is
shooting
just
that people
corporate greed?
were scared. Is that fair?
Inflation has more to do with the
And how do
monetary
people in
supply. Inflation occurs because the dollar is worth
I
less.
would assume.
The dollar is worth less, at least in part because there are more of them.
It was
There are
very
more
public
of them
when
in
it happened
part
on November
because, you
30th
know,
of
the federal
2021.
government
Yes.
created
The
more
shooter's
money
name became public
out of
shortly
thin
after
air
the shooting.
than's ever been contemplated by
If
God
you
or
recall,
man.
and you may not know, but if you
during
don't know,
COVID.
please say you don't know, that Mr. and Mrs. Crumbley's residence
That
made
was a
public.
huge factor.
That I don't.
Did you learn during your involvement in this case that there were some concerns over the safety of James and Jennifer Crumbley because they were the parents of the Oxford High School shooter?
I was never made aware of.
So all you were made aware of.
You know, they
was
could
that
always
James
take
and
money
Jennifer
out of
Crumbley
the
need to
money
be located.
supply. I'm just saying, but they don't want to
And
do
the first
that
place you went
either.
with their residence.
Yes.
They weren't there. You eventually determined and learned that they had been at a hotel in Auburn Hills from November 30th to December 3rd, the morning of December 3rd.
I'm not sure if they were there that entire time, but that's where we ended up finding the vehicle. Was at that hotel.
And did you also learn through your involvement that they registered at that hotel in Jennifer Crumbley's name?
I don't specifically remember whose name.
Monetary policies like
So
walking a
you began
tightrope.
looking for James and Jennifer Crumbley
Yeah,
before they
that's
were
fair.
formally charged.
There are
Now,
no right answers. There are only trade-offs.
I
It's like,
assume
do
in
you
your
want
career you've
do you
been
want this
involved
bad
in
thing or
what
do you
we
want this
consider
other bad
high-profile
thing? Or how about
VAs.
this
Is that
other bad
correct?
thing?
Yes.
Which of these bad
And
things do you like
oftentimes
best?
in those cases,
Yeah, that's fair.
Is it standard practice for your department to take someone into custody before the actual charges are announced?
Depends on the crime and the circumstances surrounding.
Your department often, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your department will often assume that a high-profile case or a serious offense that somebody might run.
It is a possibility. People do.
You had no information that James Crumbley had indicated that he was going to run away or flee or anything like that. Is that fair? On December 2nd of 2021.
That's fair.
I still stand behind the idea, though, that I think the bailouts in
You
response to
were aware
the
that James and
crash
Jennifer Crumbley did not have their phones
of,
after November 30th of
2008
2021 because they had
was
been
a mistake.
either given to or taken by law enforcement. But law enforcement had them in their possession.
I just don't like
Yes.
the let's give them huge power.